My name is Freedom Waffle, and today I am here with Devrik, the champion of Mox Masters August 2023. Devrik, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, what's going on, Evan? My name is Eric, also known as Devrik on Discord. I primarily play CDH for about a year now. I just got back into Paper Magic just a little over a year, and it's just been obsessed with CDH.
Yeah, and it's been paying off. You not only won Mox Masters August 2023, but you also got top 4 in the cookout, which is outstanding. Playing with you in our own testing groups, I can say you're a phenomenal player, so congratulations on that. In Mox Masters August, you went with a no-loss record, 5-0-2. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Very, very impressive. That's amazing. Mox Masters August was 139 competitors, and first place prize was $500. I know a lot of people have been splitting this prize. Did you decide to split your prize?
Yeah, so we did decide to split. Hindsight 2020, wish we didn't, but yeah, so we did decide to split. We did the same thing in Cookout too. I think the next one I don't want to split. I want to play for the money next time.
Well, it kind of evened out because you split at Cookout, so you got some extra money there, so that's kind of nice. But
Sure.
This is one of the first few tournaments where we've had 75-minute rounds. How do you think 75-minute rounds affected the metagame? Do you think it's shifted to more turbo, or did you still see a wide variety of decks?
As far as like stacks decks go, I remember only going up against one stacks deck, which was a tie-in deck in round 5, the last Swiss round. I do think that the 75-minute timer is rough for slower decks, but maybe for this one, if you were in a turbo deck, you were doing you were a mid-range with like a turbo slant.
Okay, so you think that even the decks that were mid-range focused, they pushed to be a little bit faster due to this 75-minute rounds. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was my impression. It felt like a lot of the decks that I went up against were just trying to be a little bit faster, I guess. I don't know if it was like the mulligans people were keeping were just trying to be quicker because of the 75-minute rounds. The previous Mox Masters, there was definitely a lot more stacks that I've seen.
Speaking of that, did you make any tech choices in your own list based on the new time limit?
No, so I didn't make any changes. I actually wasn't even going to be playing Najeela in the Mox tournament. I was on this Mardu summer train, and I was going to bring Dihada. And I had that list submitted, ready to go like a week before. Last minute, just switched to Najeela because I just got my ass kicked playing Dihada the day before, and I said, screw it, I'll just bring Najeela again to the next tournament.
Yep, I know we were talking in Discord, and you definitely were getting nervous the night before, and I was like, dude, just play Najeela, you're so good at it, and I'm very glad you did, because it paid off, right?
Yeah, I'm very happy that I lost. I think the day before, I was just trying to jam some games with Dihada, and I think I played a total of 11 games, and I lost 11 games, and I was so demoralized after that. I was like, I don't even want to play in this tournament tomorrow. And then, yeah, after talking to you and the other people who were beating me, also all playing turbo decks, I was like, I'm not. If I can't win a turn, I'll just play Najeela. I know Najeela. I'm comfortable with Najeela. Let's just run it.
Yep, absolutely. Najeela is also just such a strong choice right now. I want to dive into the deck itself just a little bit. It's definitely the Turbo Najeela list, similar to Memos. I know there's a couple cards different. Like a lot of decks we've seen, you slotted in the One Ring. How has this felt? Did this come up in Mox Masters at all?
I don't think a single game I had the One Ring out in any of them. All the games that I had a draw engine, it was Ristic Study. And that's been my feel with the deck in Najeela. I'm on the verge of cutting it currently. I don't think it really has a place in the Turbo Najeela core, and if you think about it, like let's say you don't have an opening hand that has a Ristic, but you have a way to get it, or just to get a draw engine, 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to be tutoring for Ristic or Fish over the One Ring. They're more mana efficient. Well, they just cost less. I'm rarely ever tutoring for the card, which is like a big thing. And I know in the Najeela Discord, Jay, who you know, he was a top 4 the last Mox Masters with Najeela. I remember seeing a comment in that Discord that he made how like certain cards he was testing, and he just felt like, if I'm not tutoring for the card, I just don't think it belongs in the deck. After seeing that, I was like, yeah, I guess like when you think about it, like how often do I actually want to get this card, right? If I have the ability to, and I don't ever feel like I'm gonna tutor for the One Ring over Ristic or Fish. Maybe in a more stacksy pot I will, because it's more likely like if there's a rule law effect, I'm probably on average gonna draw more with the One Ring as the game progresses. but you're also trying to close the game out quicker with Najeela, where Ristic and Fish can feed you a lot more cards in a short amount of turns than the One Ring.
I think that's a fantastic point. The One Ring pays off greater dividends over time, but Mystic and Ristic are fully online the turn you play them. So if your opponents are storming off, and of course we're talking about how the meta might be shifting more towards turbo, these are going to put in a lot more work in a 3-turn game than the One Ring, even if you get it out on turn 1. So I think that's a really good point. Obviously the One Ring has done a lot of work in quite a lot of decks, but as the metagame is settling from these new cards, we're going to see which decks actually really want to play this card and which decks it's just okay in. So I think that's a really good point. Another interesting option you have here, I know a lot of these lists have been on Soul Partition just to get rid of problem permanents, but you are on the tried and true Psych Rift. Why did you decide to go back to Cyclonic Rift?
Yeah, so comparing my list to a lot of other Turbo and Najeela lists, very similar to Memo's, I think Memo is also still on Soul Partition. My opinion with Soul Partition, the ceiling on it is like, oh, you can exile your own permanent to put it back into play. Like usually it's Dockside is like 9 times out of 10 when you're going to use that. That has never come up with me in Najeela. I'm always using it as a removal piece. A few people have asked me like, why are you on Psych Rift and not just run Soul Partition? They do the same thing. My experience in Najeela is Force of Will. Being able to play that for free requires you to pitch a blue card. The deck does not have a lot of blue cards that you want to pitch. Like, I rarely want to pitch a Derevi or a Thoracle to protect something unless, like, it's not my first choice. So it's come up often, like, where I draw the Psych Rift, but it just ends up being fodder for Force of Will. Same is, like, for Fimage in my list. Fimage is also, I guess, more of a meta call. Like, I'm used to playing in a lot of pods with Atraxas and Tivits, and you can copy a Dockside or those commanders, but it's also just another thing to pitch the Force of Will. And it comes up in so many games where I have a Force of Will, but I don't have a blue card. And it actually happened in our finals game, where the other Najeela player could have stopped the Grim Hireling, but just did not have the blue card. I'm not saying that running Psych Rift or Fimage would have changed that, but a slightly higher density of blue cards, it's relevant for a 5-color deck that does not have a lot of room for slots.
Exactly, and these are the kind of decisions with deck building that you have to think about when you're on this really high level of play. Because yeah, most games it's not going to come up, it's not going to matter, but the few games that do, it's going to make your deck just that much more consistent. And we can see here that we have, even though blue is the highest percentage of symbols, obviously if you're trying to pitch a blue card, you know, only 24% of your deck is blue. So I think that's something to really keep in mind. How tough was the competition here? We just talked about you top 4ing the Cookout, which is an in-person tournament with slightly more players. Did this feel like very similar level of competition, or is one event harder than the other?
I think webcam tournaments are definitely harder than in-person. Just in general, I think like playing on webcam is obviously a different feel than in person. You can feel a little bit more relaxed in person. And also I always personally, and I'm sure other people can attest to this, playing on Spell Table, there's definitely things like to keeping track of certain things, like keeping track of certain stacks pieces or hate bears, or just cards that are just relevant for what game plan you're trying to execute. For me, it's just a little bit harder to keep track of those things on like a webcam tournament than it is in person, because you just see everything. You can just reach over and grab a card to look at it. Where in Spell Table, you just have to like keep your eyes peeled on the screen at all times. So there's definitely like that aspect of playing in an online tournament versus in person. One thing too I noticed at in-person tournaments, like if there's like a tip I can give, would be to be very cautious of bleeding your hand. It happens on Spell Table too, and people are usually nice enough to point out if you're bleeding your hand. I felt like at the Cookout, it was also like my first big in-person tournament, so like I wasn't like I didn't actually say anything, but if I saw somebody bled something, I'd like, it's just free information. It happened a lot more in the Cookout than it does in Spell Table.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a really good point. You're sitting on the same side of the table as everyone you're playing with, right? So instead of, 180 degrees for them to see your hand, it's, maybe just 45 degrees for them to just kind of glance over and be able to get a good angle on your hand. And obviously most of them are probably not trying to look, but if you're not really careful and you're not angling your chair physically away from them so that the backs of your sleeves are facing them, it's honestly super easy to see your cards. So I think that's a really good tip. Also, one thing to note with webcam tournaments that I've also experienced is it's harder to get a proper threat assessment if you're not constantly asking how many cards people have in hand. Like, you can see their hands, but it's just hard to know exactly how many they have. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. Yeah, it's definitely interesting how big of a difference it is in webcam versus real life tournaments, because you also get all these cues, these social cues from players when you can actually see them rather than just their hands. So that's definitely an interesting point. And at the end of the day, these tournaments come down to, once you've gotten to top 16 and top 4, it's just 2 games. 2 games of Magic is, there's a lot of variance that can happen there. I know obviously you've been playing a lot of in-person Magic with the Cookout and a lot on Spell Table. Did you do anything in particular to get ready for this event?
Yeah, yes and no. So technically yes, because I signed up like a week before. I knew I wasn't 100% if I was going to participate, just because the previous Mox Masters 90-minute rounds, they tended to be so long. It always feels like a marathon. And by the 3rd Swiss round, I was always just exhausted. I also never particularly did very well in the previous ones. I did go into it again. Went into it thinking I was going to play Tejada, so I was jamming a lot of games throughout that week just to get ready for it. And then obviously last minute switching to Najeela. But I think even though I was playing a different deck, it still obviously helped keeping my brain fresh for the tournament and getting myself ready for that mindset.
Was there any spicy plays that you want to talk about from the tournament?
Yes, definitely. My favorite game, and I wish it was streamed, was my top 16 game. Just because, like, in my head, as I was in that game, and I'll talk a little bit about, like, what happened, but I just remember in my head, I'm like, this is exactly you shouldn't do this at all, especially in a top 16 game. But, like, I was so greedy. I was on the play, and I was like, screw it, I'm just gonna jam it and see what happens. So, my top 16 game, it was very quick. I won on turn 2, and I was on the play. I don't remember exactly what was in my hand, but I remember some key cards. It was a Tarnished Citadel, a Plateau, Esper Sentinel, Vamp Tutor. Those are the 4 that I remember. So it was just Tarnished Citadel, Esper, Path. And the next person was Atraxa, who played like 3 rocks. It was Blue Farm, who played an Esper, and then Rog Cyan 4th, who played 2 rocks. And it came back to my turn, and I sat there on my upkeep just thinking of Vamp Tutoring for Dockside. So at this point, I had a Vamp Tutor, I had a Summoner's Pact, Oracle was in my hand, a Wish Claw, Breach. But basically, my head was like, okay, I can tutor for the Dockside, Summoner's Pact for an ESG, play the Plateau, play the Dockside, Calling Ritual, play the Breach, Wish Claw, and basically just win with a Breach line on turn 2. But it was so risky because obviously if I get stopped at all post Summoner's Pact, I lose. I can't pay my pact trigger. But in my head, I was like, I got to do this and see if it works, because it just seems like so much fun, and it paid off. But it was definitely my favorite game, just because of, I guess, like the spiciness of just like jamming turn 2 Summoner's Pact with no way to protect myself on my next upkeep.
That is spicy indeed. Also, turn 2 win is just beautiful. And there's a lot at stake. Like, I think a lot of times people will play differently and more cautiously in tournaments. But hey, I mean, sometimes just jamming and making them have it really pays off. So I love it. That's an awesome way to get in the top 4. All right, well, Devrik, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Discord. My Discord handle is Devrik203. I'm pretty good at responding to messages. I'm not like getting slammed by a bunch of people, even though I am the reigning Mox champion. No big deal. But yeah, you can hit me up on Discord. You guys got questions on Najeela or just CEDH in general, I'll be happy to answer any and all questions.
And I'll leave a link to your Mox field in the description as well, in case anyone wants to check out your deck. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me, Devrik. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Evan. We're Freedom Waffle as you go by online, and it's been a pleasure. Happy to do the interview.